Hey guys, tonight we're starting with something truly bizarre. Zeus, king of the gods, thunderbolt collector, eternal abs flasher, once turned into a goose. Or maybe it was a swan. Depends who you ask, but either way, feathers were involved. You're trudging through an old marble courtyard under a sleepy moon, and there, gliding across a still lake like it pays rent, is a god in waterfowl form. Not exactly majestic. Definitely confusing. And yes, this is a real myth, passed down through centuries like a cursed family recipe. The ancient Greeks, with all their epic battles and noble tragedies, also managed to sneak in stories about gods turning into animals for reasons that range from mildly manipulative to deeply unhinged. And tonight, you'll be sinking softly into that fluffy down of absurdity. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting accuracy or moral clarity. You'll hear tales where Zeus does goose cosplay, Hera has passive-aggressive dinner parties, and oracles speak in what can only be described as drunk poetry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I'm genuinely curious which time zone we're all pretending to sleep in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with feathers. You're walking along the edge of a dream, somewhere between night and nap, when you hear the faint honk of destiny. There, across the dim reeds of some mythological pond, is Zeus. Not in his usual bearded glory with thunderbolts vibe, nope. Tonight, he's a goose. Or possibly a swan, depending on how poetic your brain's feeling. Either way, it's a bird with attitude. It has his eyes. Which is concerning. Historians still argue whether this tale began as divine symbolism, animal worship, or just a very dedicated fanfiction from a poet with too much wine and not enough oversight. What we do know is that Greek mythology is packed with shape-shifting. Gods become animals to escape, seduce, prank, or just, because it's Tuesday. You creep closer, watching the goose god glide across the pond like it owns the place, which, let's be honest, he probably does. The moon glints off water, illuminating soft ripples and ancient reeds that have probably seen this exact scenario too many times to care anymore. This isn't even Zeus's weirdest form, by the way. He's also been a golden shower, a bull, and once, weirdly, a cloud. But goose mode? That's got a kind of tragic comedy to it. It's regal and ridiculous, elegant yet wildly impractical for things like smiting or throne-sitting. A gentle breeze rustles through olive trees, and you remember, Greek myths weren't just entertainment. They were explanations. For weather. For war. For why some babies randomly hatched from eggs. Seriously. This goose story leads to that. So here's the historical fact for tonight. In many versions of the myth, Zeus took the form of a swan or goose to seduce, or let's say, mysteriously approach, a Spartan queen named Leda. What followed was one of the strangest divine encounters in classical mythology, which allegedly resulted in 2 eggs, and from those hatched Helen of Troy and her siblings. Yes. Hatched. From eggs. Because that's how Greece rolled. Now, the quirky tidbit, some fringe sources, possibly ancient, possibly just dudes at a symposium, believe the transformation wasn't about disguise at all. It was symbolic. The goose represented purity. Or fertility. Or possibly government corruption. Hard to say. One papyrus even suggests that the goose was metaphorical for celestial visitation. You know, like aliens but more toga-based. And here's the kicker, ancient texts don't always agree on the details. Some say Leda was already married. Others claim she was asleep. A few poetic fragments imply she met two gods in one night, Zeus and her husband, and the kids may be a divine paternity puzzle. Helen and her siblings could be Zeus's kids. Or not. Historians still argue whether Leda consented, whether the goose form was a dream, and whether any of it even happened at all or was just metaphor gone feral. But none of that matters right now. Right now, you're sitting by a mythic lake, lulled by distant croaking frogs and rustling fig trees. You watch the goose glide, its reflection flickering gently beneath it, and you wonder what it's thinking. Maybe it's pondering philosophy. Or taxes. Or how to get dry in all those feathers. Your eyelids droop a little as you listen to distant harp strings, probably just Apollo practicing for open mic night. The air is warm but not heavy, the stars above are dull and soft, as if they've seen too much. You think you hear a laugh, low, divine, echoing through the hills like someone just told the gods a very inappropriate mortal joke. And in that moment, half asleep, surrounded by ancient nonsense and dream logic, you kind of get it. Why someone would write down this story. Why myths sometimes need birds and absurdity and cosmic drama to explain the messy, mysterious parts of being human. And also, it's just really funny to imagine Zeus, king of everything, waddling around honking at Spartans. You blink slowly. The goose has disappeared, slipped away into the reeds or maybe just turned back into lightning and attitude. Your feet take you uphill now, through a thin mist that clings to your ankles like needy cats, towards something glowing gold on the horizon. Mount Olympus. Not the actual mountain, mind you. That would be steep, cold, and full of yaks. No, this Olympus is mythic, hovering between dream and legend. It looks less like a mountain and more like a very exclusive gated community floating slightly above cloud level. There's a suspicious lack of toilets, but plenty of columns and dramatic lighting. You pass a pair of very judgy marble statues on the way in. One of them winks at you. Unsettling. Inside, the vibe is less sacred council and more eternal reality TV show with wine sponsorship. The gods are all here. Aphrodite's mid-selfie. Ares is flexing aggressively at a bush. Hermes is selling knockoff sandals. And then there's Zeus, now in full humanoid glory, reclining on a suspiciously oversized chair like he invented lounging. Olympus is not what you expected. You were thinking wisdom, gravitas, divine decrees echoing across the heavens. Instead, you get petty squabbles, theatrical entrances, and passive-aggressive lightning bolts. There's an actual chart on the wall, yes, a chart, ranking gods by mortal approval rating. Athena is in the lead, probably for her wise TikToks. Dionysus is doing surprisingly well for a guy who's tipsy 87% of the time. Zeus. Let's just say he's not winning any popularity contests, especially not after the whole goose thing. Or the bull thing. Or the time he turned into an ant and ruined someone's toga party. Long story. And you start to understand something crucial about the Greek pantheon: these weren't perfect deities. They weren't untouchable ideals. They were walking, talking soap operas with fire powers and sandals. The Greeks didn't worship perfection, they worshipped chaos they could relate to. Historical fact break: Mount Olympus was believed to be a real place, specifically the highest mountain in Greece, rising nearly 3,000 meters into the clouds. But the mythological Olympus? It existed in the imaginations of poets like Homer and Hesiod. No one was climbing it to hand-deliver mail to Apollo. It was a divine abstraction. A heavenly HOA with rules, grudges, and probably some extremely outdated bylaws. The air up here smells like ambrosia and drama. You pass Hephaestus, clanking away at a new divine espresso machine. Artemis walks by with a glowing bow and the energy of someone who'd rather be alone with deer. You hear Hera somewhere nearby, her voice sharper than a Spartan spear. And speaking of Hera, Zeus's long-suffering wife, queen of the gods, and patron saint of, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed, she's definitely noticed the goose stunt. You don't see her yet. But you feel her. Like the calm before a thunderstorm. Or the quiet sound of sandals being passive-aggressively rearranged. There's a whisper across the hall, did you hear? He did it again. Another whisper, what kind of bird this time? Goose. Or swan. He's losing creativity. You spot Hestia in the corner, warming herself by an eternal flame, rolling her eyes like this happens every Tuesday. Which it probably does. Quirky tidbit time, there's an obscure 2nd century scroll from Pausanias that suggests the gods had weekly assemblies to review divine behavior. Like a celestial HR department. If true, this means someone had to take minutes every time Zeus shape-shifted to woo a mortal or Poseidon flooded a beach because he didn't get invited to brunch. And yes, historians still argue whether these myths were meant to justify royal behavior, entertain the public, or serve as complex metaphors for seasonal changes and societal norms. Some scholars believe the gods were anthropomorphized chaos, ways for ancient Greeks to process the unpredictability of nature and people. Others think they were exaggerated versions of actual historical rulers. All agree on one thing, these stories were never boring. You take a seat on a cloud-shaped bench, surprisingly firm, and gaze out at the mythic skyline. Somewhere in the distance, Pegasus is doing loop-the-loops and yelling something about overtime. And that's when the doors swing open with the kind of drama only a queen of Olympus can manage. Hera enters. Now, you've never seen divine rage packaged this elegantly. She doesn't stomp. She glides. Her gown flows like she's walking through syrup made of stars. Her eyes? They don't just see. They assess. They categorize. They make you want to apologize for things you haven't done yet. She walks past the gods without a word. Straight to Zeus. Doesn't raise her voice. Doesn't hurl a goblet. Just says, in a tone cold enough to freeze wine. So. A goose? And somewhere in the distance, a lyre string snaps. You'd think Zeus, king of Olympus, wielder of thunder, cosmic authority, would have a defense prepared. But in this moment, he looks like a very large toddler caught in the act of drawing on the wall with cosmic crayons. He clears his throat. Scratches his beard. Mutters something about symbolism and creative expression. Hera blinks. Turns. Smiles. And that's worse. You decide it's probably time to move along before lightning becomes a group activity. You stand, stretch your legs, and quietly step back toward the shimmering hallway. The halls echo with immortal banter. Somewhere, Dionysus spills a drink. Athena critiques a poem. Ares challenges a flower to a duel. You slip away unnoticed, mind full of feathers, egos, and the uncomfortable realization that even gods can be petty. You're halfway down a golden corridor that smells faintly of pomegranate and divine judgment when you hear it. The sigh. Not the little kind you make when someone finishes the cereal. No, this is the 1,000-year exhale of a woman who's been putting up with nonsense since the Bronze Age. You follow the sound and find her in an alcove lit with soft firelight, surrounded by embroidered cushions that seem far too nice to sit on. Hera, Queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage, women, and having to deal with whatever bird-shaped chaos Zeus is up to this week. She's reclining with the grace of someone who could burn a city just by raising one eyebrow. Her hair's perfect. Her robe is doing things fabrics have no business doing without a wind machine. And she's sipping something suspiciously red from a goblet that may or may not be actual pomegranate wine, or possibly the tears of wayward demigods. You don't sit. You just sort of hover nearby, like a leaf on Olympus's very well-polished breeze. She speaks, not to you exactly, but loud enough for the tapestry to hear. Another goose. A pause. He knows I hate feathers. It's not even anger anymore. It's professional-grade exasperation. She's been married to Zeus for, well, time's kind of a suggestion up here, but let's say, too long. And while mortal couples might argue about dishes or who left the door open, divine marriages, they deal in betrayal, thunderbolts, and livestock transformations. Historical fact. Hera and Zeus were siblings and married, which was weird even by divine standards. Their relationship wasn't a model of romance, it was a political alliance, a cosmic tug-of-war, and occasionally a full-blown thunderstorm. Hera was worshipped across ancient Greece not just as Zeus's wife, but as a powerful goddess in her own right, protector of women, childbirth, and the sacred, holy bond of not turning into a bird every time you have a midlife crisis. You inch closer, and she eyes you. Not unkindly. But in the way a cat eyes a bird it's pretending not to care about. He said it was for artistic reasons, she mutters. That the goose symbolized renewal. I told him it symbolized divorce. She's not wrong. And here's your quirky tidbit, in some lesser-known temple rituals, especially out in rural Boeotia, geese were actually kept as sacred animals in Hera's honor. Yes. Geese. As in honk honk, flap flap. She may hate Zeus's little feathery escapades, but irony apparently isn't off-limits in mythology. Some historians believe these geese were seen as protectors, alert, loyal, mildly terrifying. You know, kind of like Hera. But back to her current mood. She hasn't exploded. She hasn't turned anyone into a weasel. That's progress. Let me guess, she says dryly, swirling her wine. He's telling everyone it's a metaphor. You nod slowly, as if you've personally seen Zeus try to explain away a shape-shifting incident as deeply symbolic. She sighs again and leans back. You know what the worst part is? He's not even consistent. Goose. Bull. Golden rain. Cloud. I married a spreadsheet of bird nonsense. And now she's laughing. Not joyfully, more like someone who's accepted that the cosmic sitcom she's trapped in will never get cancelled. Historians still argue whether Hera was truly a jealous shrew, as many ancient male authors painted her, or whether that image was the result of a deeply patriarchal storytelling tradition. In many cults and city-states, Hera was revered independently from Zeus, sometimes even more than him. To those worshippers, she wasn't a sidekick or an angry wife, she was the embodiment of divine justice, the guardian of oaths, and a queen who didn't suffer fools. Especially not goose-shaped ones. Your attention drifts to the tapestry on the wall, an elaborate thing with threads of gold and scenes that change slightly when you blink. You watch a familiar one unfold, Zeus, descending from the clouds in bird form. Leda, standing by the river. The air thick with the kind of romantic tension that only ever ends in wildly confusing offspring. Hera follows your gaze. Ah, that one. Yes, The Goose Incident. Leda. Another mystical union. Her fingers curl around the goblet. They always call it that. Never shape-shifting nonsense. You wonder aloud what she thinks of Helen of Troy, born from that union. Hera's lip curls. Beautiful. Powerful. Trouble. That child was never mine, and yet somehow every war she causes lands on my ledger. A pause. And don't get me started on Paris and that stupid apple. You sit, finally. And as you do, she waves a hand. A breeze kicks up. Soft, golden dust drifts from the ceiling like powdered starlight. And then, softened, maybe slightly vulnerable, she says something you weren't expecting. Do you know what the real tragedy is? She asks. It's not the cheating. Or the shape-shifting. It's that he never thinks he has to change. He thinks being a god means never being wrong. You don't answer. There's nothing to say. She stands, smooth as water over stone, and glides past you toward the hall, trailing jasmine and wrath. Tell him, she says, without looking back, next time he tries the goose trick, I'll be the hunter. And just like that, she's gone. You exhale. The silence fills in behind her like sand over footprints. Outside, somewhere in the soft, humming Olympus sky, a bird calls. You're not sure if it's a warning. Or a punchline. You're still sitting there, blinking into the void Hera left behind, when the wall beside you flickers like a bad memory. A low hum fills the air. The tapestry starts shifting again, only this time, it's not Leda and the goose. It's a strange circular arena. A cloud-stitched coliseum. A place where egos go to strut and feathers fly. You're about to witness something sacred, absurd, and deeply underreported in mainstream mythology, the divine shape-shifting Olympics. Yes. This is real. Or at least mythically real, which is sometimes better. You find yourself floating gently into a bleacher seat made of mist and moonlight. Across the field, gods are limbering up, not with stretches, but with dramatic entrances and magical glow-ups. Hermes arrives via cloud scooter. Poseidon shows up riding a dolphin made of sapphires. Athena just appears, fully armored, sipping what looks like divine oat milk. And Zeus? Oh, Zeus enters last. Shirtless, obviously. Hair windswept, beard freshly fluffed. He's already halfway into his transformation form, glowing faintly, with an aura that screams, I'm about to ruin someone's peaceful afternoon. A golden announcer's voice booms out of nowhere. Welcome to the 103rd Annual Shape-Shifting Showcase. This year's theme, animals that make mortals question their life choices. First up. Apollo. The sun god steps forward and transforms into a shimmering golden dolphin, flips midair, then lands in a pool of sunlight. The crowd loses it. Literal fireworks explode from clouds. You think one of them smells like citrus. Next, Aphrodite. She winks and turns into a dove, classic, romantic, tasteful. She even leaves a tiny heart-shaped feather on the ground. Cute. Calculated. Lethal levels of charm. And then there's Zeus. He cracks his neck. Smirks. The stadium holds its breath. With one dramatic flash, boom, he becomes a goose. Not a swan. Not a phoenix. A goose. White, proud, with the kind of energy that says, I've chased toddlers in parks and I regret nothing. And honestly, it works. He struts around the field with full honk confidence. One wing flicks back dramatically. The other stretches out, pure flair. You've never seen a bird mug for an audience quite like this. Historical fact for you, shape-shifting myths weren't unique to Zeus or even to Greek mythology. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, gods regularly took animal forms: lions, bulls, serpents. In Greece, it was a way to represent divine interaction with the mortal world. The animal form often symbolized a trait: strength, cunning, fertility. But in Zeus's case, scholars still debate whether he picked creatures based on symbolism, or just vibes. Now here's the quirky bit: there's an obscure tale, found in the margins of a 4th century BCE manuscript, that claims Zeus once attempted to turn into a flamingo. But his feathers got stuck halfway through the transformation, and the result was so unspeakably awkward that he banned flamingos from Olympus' social functions for eternity. Possibly fake. Definitely hilarious. You watch as other gods follow suit. Dionysus becomes a leopard but accidentally trips on his own tail. Hecate becomes a 3-headed owl and wins, most likely to haunt your dreams. Artemis turns into a doe, gets full marks from the nature judges, and glares at Ares until he withdraws from the event entirely. Zeus finishes his performance with a dramatic honk and a flap, then returns to humanoid form in a literal puff of feathers. He bows. The crowd goes wild. He winks at you like you're in on the joke. You're not, but you nod politely. Historians still argue whether events like this were allegories, meant to represent divine unpredictability, the shifting nature of fate, or just ancient authors amusing themselves in scroll margins. One theory suggests the stories of divine shape-shifting were moral tests, ways to teach mortals humility. Another theory: divine prank wars. Eternal ones. With feathers. The event ends with a slow procession, gods returning to their pedestals, feathers and fur fading back into robes and laurels. You notice a scoreboard in the sky tallying performance, artistic interpretation, and audience gasp factor. Zeus, somehow, leads in every category except grace. And then a booming bell sounds. Not a real one. The kind that echoes inside your chest and makes you feel like you forgot to do your taxes. A portal opens at midfield. And from it steps a mortal. You don't recognize him at first. He's wearing a toga and a very nervous expression. He's holding something that looks suspiciously like a poetry scroll. This is Homer. Or maybe Hesiod. The myths don't agree. Could be just some guy who wandered in from a symposium with too much fermented grape juice and a dream. Zeus greets him with the familiarity of someone who's been misquoted often. "Ah," he says. "My biographer." The mortal bows and starts reading: Zeus, mighty ruler of Olympus, descended in the form of a noble swan to Goose, Zeus corrects. "Ah. Goose." The scribe winces. That doesn't scan well in dactylic hexameter. Zeus shrugs. Neither does turning into rain, but you kept that bit. There's a long, awkward silence. And then you realize, this entire event, this Olympic-level peacocking, isn't for the gods. It's for the stories. The scribes. The mortals. They shape-shift so we remember. They cause chaos so we write it down. They become animals, symbols, metaphors, because that's how we explain the unexplainable. The gods fade. The arena dims. A soft breeze returns you to the clouds. The mist pulls you gently away, like a sleepy tide. You hear one final honk in the distance. Zeus, probably, reminding the universe that sometimes, even gods just want to show off. You drift gently down from the cloud Colosseum, still mildly winded from watching a goose outshine a literal sun god, and land softly on a cobblestone path that hums with dream logic. Ahead, a stream glides between marble columns, the water glowing faintly blue like someone accidentally dropped starlight into it. And there, sitting by the bank, brushing her hair with a comb that probably costs more than your apartment, is Leda. Yep. That Leda. Queen of Sparta. Wife of King Tyndareus. Unwilling star of one of mythology's most awkward origin stories. And currently, on what looks suspiciously like a spa day. You ease closer. The scene is bizarrely serene. Birds chirp in what can only be described as major key. Roses bloom out of rocks for no botanical reason. A distant harp plays a tune that's either romantic or wildly foreboding, hard to tell with harps. Leda looks up, gives you a once-over like you're late for something, then smiles with the calm weariness of a woman who's been mythologized a few too many times. You here to ask about the goose, she asks. You nod, slowly. She sighs, sets down the comb, and stretches her arms like she's preparing for a TED Talk. Fine. But don't expect it to make sense. Nothing ever does when Zeus is involved. And so begins the tale. Historical fact time. In the most common version of the myth, Zeus transforms into a swan, though we've clearly established he might have just been a confused goose with good lighting, and approaches Leda on the banks of the Eurotas River. That same night, Leda is also with her husband, King Tyndareus. What happens next is flexible depending on the poet, the region, and how many glasses of wine have been consumed. Leda picks up a river stone and skips it across the glowing water. They say I was seduced. Others say I was attacked. Some even say it was all a dream. Her eyes narrow. And none of them asked what I thought. You sit beside her. The grass feels like velvet. You have a strange craving for figs. She continues, her voice softer now. All I know is I ended up with 2 eggs. Eggs. Like a hen, but with more paperwork. Quirky tidbit incoming, yes, the eggs. According to myth, Leda lays 2 massive eggs, possibly from 2 different fathers. One hatches Helen and Clytemnestra. The other, Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri. And just to make things even weirder, some versions say only Helen and Pollux are divine children, while the others are fully mortal. This celestial custody arrangement has fueled scholarly arguments for literal centuries. Leda pulls a blanket around her shoulders. One of the eggs had a glow. The other? Not so much. Try explaining that to your husband. She chuckles. He just nodded like he knew what was going on. He didn't. No one did. You ask what it felt like, having gods shape your fate from the clouds. She picks another rose, twirls it. Like being a character in someone else's story. Which, I suppose, I was. Historians still argue whether the myth of Leda was ever meant to be literal. Some believe it was a metaphor for divine conception, the idea that powerful heroes and heroines were born not just of flesh and blood, but of cosmic will. Others say it's a political narrative. Helen, born of Zeus, wasn't just beautiful, she was divinely endorsed. That matters when you're trying to justify a decade-long war and several hundred ships worth of chaos. A soft breeze ruffles Leda's hair. She closes her eyes. Do you want to know the worst part? She whispers. People remember the goose. The egg. The war. But they never remember I raised them. I loved them. Mortal or divine, they were mine. And somehow, that lands heavier than any thunderbolt. You sit in silence for a while. The river keeps flowing. Somewhere upstream, maybe Zeus is practicing his honk in another form. Maybe he's moved on to being a fish or a dramatic cloud again. But here, by the stream, is a woman who was real, at least to the mythmakers. A queen caught between gods and kings, choices and consequences, symbolism and scandal. A small egg rests beside her on a patch of moss. She sees you looking. Not real, she says. Just for tourists. She stands, brushes herself off, and gives you a wry look. Tell them what you want. But don't forget I had a name before the bird showed up. You promise you won't. She walks away, back toward the palace, an elegant figure moving through half history, half dream. The grass seals behind her footprints like it can't bear to remember them. And you? You stay by the river a bit longer. Watch the water glitter past. Imagine eggs that glow and daughters that change the world. Imagine being a footnote in someone else's legend and having the strength to own it anyway. Somewhere, a harp sighs again. Or maybe it's just the wind. You're still by the riverbank, watching reflections ripple across the surface like they're trying to remember which version of the myth they're supposed to be telling. And then, floating down the stream as if summoned by pure narrative convenience, comes a basket. Not just any basket. It's shaped like an egg. Because of course it is. You reach out, nudge it closer, and inside you see paperwork. Not papyrus. Not scrolls. Not even old-timey wax tablets. These are files. Color-coded. Titled things like Helen, TBD paternity, and Pollux versus Castor, who's actually immortal. It's the divine birth certificate backlog. A celestial bureaucracy of epic confusion. You leaf through the top file and suddenly, whoosh, you're standing in a grand hall that smells faintly of parchment, lavender, and historical uncertainty. Marble floors stretch in all directions. Statues of winged babies and concerned-looking owls loom overhead. You're in what must be the mythological department of parentage and egg logistics. A bored nymph at the front desk waves a stylus in your direction. Here for a hatching record. You nod slowly. She sighs and points you to a hallway labeled Room 3B, Eggs, Twins, and Divine Shenanigans. Inside, a chalkboard diagram shows two giant eggs, one labeled Zeus, and the other, Tyndareus maybe. Each with arrows pointing to a quartet of baby icons, Helen, Clytemnestra, Castor, Pollux. Underneath it, written in tired handwriting. Historians still argue whether the mortal/demigod split was poetic metaphor or bad celestial aim. You sit down in a too-stiff chair as a scholarly-looking satyr enters, adjusts his tiny spectacles, and begins a lecture clearly meant for an audience with better sleep schedules than yours. Let's begin with the basics, he says. Helen, yes, the Helen. The face that launched 1,000 ships and sank just as many careers, was allegedly born from an egg. One of two, laid by Leda after, well, the incident. You stifle a chuckle. He continues, unbothered. But that's not all. The same clutch of divine poultry product also included the twins Castor and Pollux, better known as the Dioscuri. You may recognize them from such celestial bodies as Gemini. Yep, those two stars twinkling up there. Those are the twins. Or, depending on the version, one is up there and the other is stuck below. It gets complicated. Here's your historical fact. Castor and Pollux were worshipped across the Greek world as protectors of sailors. Seafaring crews would often pray to the Dioscuri before heading out, believing the twins could calm storms or guide them home. Their mythology was dualistic, one mortal, one divine, which made them perfect symbols for navigating between danger and salvation, between the human and the divine. Your Satyr professor begins drawing stick figures. Now, he says, in some accounts, both twins are children of Zeus. In others, only Pollux is divine, with Castor being the son of King Tyndareus. Which raises complications. He gestures to a diagram labeled Shared Immortality Custody Agreement. Pollux, immortal and fabulous, begs Zeus to let Castor share in his divine status. Zeus, in a rare moment of actual empathy, agrees, with conditions. The twins must take turns. One day in Olympus, one in the underworld. A celestial timeshare. Quirky detail. The Dioscuri had different talents. Castor was a horse tamer. Pollux, a boxer. So basically, ancient Greece's idea of the ultimate road trip duo, one punches problems, the other parallel parks the chariot. You start to ask about Helen again, but the satyr's already rolling into her drama. Helen's birth certificate, he explains, flipping to another chart, was such a mess that even ancient poets wrote contradictory origin stories on the same page. Some said she was the daughter of Zeus and Leda. Others claimed she was the daughter of Nemesis, the literal goddess of retribution, who was also tricked by Zeus in swan form. Pause. Yes, he reused the bird costume. You want to laugh, but you're also deeply unsettled by how many eggs one god can be responsible for. Now, historians. Oh, they live for this stuff. Some think Helen wasn't even meant to be real at first, just a stand-in for divine beauty and feminine chaos. Others argue she was based on a real person whose story got slowly feathered into myth. And then there's the small, persistent theory that there were actually two Helens. One real, one phantom, created by the gods as a decoy. Yes. A phantom Helen. Which, let's be honest, is such a spicy plot twist that even Homer might have gone, wait, what now? The satyr shrugs, gathering up scrolls. In the end, he says, no one really knows. All we have are stories. Eggs. Twins. Beauty that causes wars. And a goose with a suspiciously smug expression. You're ushered out of the office gently. The hallway pulses with light, the floor now turning into rippling water under your feet. You're being carried, not by waves, but by story. Myth. Legend. Helen, Clytemnestra, Castor, Pollux. Children of gods. Or not. Heroes. Villains. Egg-born enigmas whose names outlasted their parents, their wars, even their authors. And as the final file folder drifts shut behind you, you think, how strange it is that something so human, love, family, jealousy, could hatch from something as ridiculous as divine poultry. Still, stranger things have come from less impressive birds. And at least swans look kind of graceful. Unlike, say, peacocks. But don't worry. That's coming later. You're walking now, not through Olympus, not through temples or glowing rivers, but across sand. Fine, golden grains that whisper with every step. The sky above you is bruised with early dawn, and in the far-off distance, you can just make out the outline of a city behind high walls. Troy. Before it was ash, before the horse, before Brad Pitt, there was just a city. And somewhere in the folds of fate and feathers, a single mythological incident set the whole thing in motion. You find yourself strolling beside a makeshift campfire. 3 goddesses are gathered there, clearly in the middle of an argument that started about 3,000 years ago and hasn't let up since. A golden apple sits in the center. Innocent. Shiny. Very much the troublemaker. You sit quietly, like a very polite eavesdropper, as the trio of divine personalities continue their squabble. There's Hera, who you already know, stern, statuesque, gives off school principal who remembers your gum offense from 3rd grade vibes. Then there's Athena. Robed, armored, glowing faintly with wisdom and a bit of smugness. She adjusts her helmet like she's preparing for a TED Talk/duel. And finally, Aphrodite. Beautiful, barefoot in the sand, sipping ambrosia through a jeweled straw, looking like someone who definitely knows she's about to win. Historical fact, this very moment is one of the most pivotal events in Greek mythology. It's called the Judgment of Paris. The story goes that Eris, the goddess of discord, wasn't invited to a divine party, because even gods throw shade. So, in pure middle school fashion, she tossed a golden apple into the mix, engraved with the words, "To the fairest." Naturally, it caused chaos. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claimed the apple. And rather than settle it over a casual arm wrestling match, they asked a mortal to decide who was the most beautiful. Enter Paris, a Trojan prince with decent cheekbones and very poor long-term planning skills. You watch as the 3 goddesses rehearse their bribes. Hera offers power. Athena offers wisdom and military success. Aphrodite? She offers the love of the most beautiful mortal woman alive. Helen. Yep. That Helen. The egg baby. The one who may or may not have been part phantom. The one married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. But hey, details. Quirky tidbit, some lesser-known versions of the myth say Paris didn't even want to judge. He was forced by Zeus, who didn't want to deal with the drama himself. So instead, the fate of empires rested on the shoulders of a man whose main qualifications were pretty and available. You find yourself fast-forwarding, just slightly. The scene blurs. Paris, clutching the apple like it's a grenade, stares at the 3 goddesses. He hesitates. Then hands it to Aphrodite. Somewhere, 1,000 poets sigh in satisfaction. Somewhere else, Hera starts plotting exactly how many cities she can burn. And just like that, the war begins. But not with swords. Not yet. First, Paris has to go claim his prize. That means heading to Sparta, where Helen lives, still presumably unaware that she's being treated like a divine coupon. Now, historians still argue whether Helen went with Paris willingly. Some accounts say she fell in love. Others suggest she was kidnapped. A few particularly spicy versions say the real Helen never went to Troy at all, that the gods created a phantom version, a sort of mystical Helen hologram, while the real one was hidden safely in Egypt. It's like ancient identity theft, but with swans and divine backup. You pass through time like it's a gauzy curtain. Now you're at sea. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet. Paris and Helen stand at the bow, backlit by a crimson sunset. He looks proud. She looks distant. You want to ask her how she feels, but the wind carries you forward again. Troy appears, grand, golden, doomed. The walls are tall, the city bustling, unaware it's about to become history's most poetic pile of rubble. Inside the palace, Helen is treated like a prize. A jewel. A queen. but never like a person. And she knows it. She wanders the halls like a ghost in her own story. You catch her at a window, staring out over the sea, as if waiting for something, or someone, to undo what's already been done. Below, Trojan soldiers train. Priam the king worries. Cassandra, his cursed daughter, raves about burning ships and wooden horses. No one listens. Helen whispers to no one, "I didn't choose this." But the myths already have. The poems are written. The story has momentum now, and momentum in myth is nearly impossible to stop. And through it all, at the center, fluttering unseen like a forgotten feather, is that goose. That ridiculous, honking, feathered catalyst. Because without Zeus's odd obsession with creative courtship, there would be no Helen. And without Helen, no Paris. And without Paris, well, you get it. This whole war, this mythic avalanche of betrayal and beauty, started with a bird bath gone wildly out of control. The sky grows dark. You step back from the window where Helen stood. The city is quiet for now. But you can feel the tension in the cobblestones. The inevitability. The poems are winding up their lines. It won't be long now. The walls of Troy blur behind you like a fading dream, and suddenly you're walking through mist again, only now it smells faintly of incense and candle wax, and the air is so still it feels like time itself is holding its breath. You're somewhere sacred. Old stone underfoot. Shadows flickering on walls covered in symbols you vaguely recognize, laurel crowns, lightning bolts, something that looks suspiciously like a bird wearing a smug expression. And at the center of it all is a temple. Low and round, with a wide open entrance. The kind of place that doesn't just invite mystery, it dares you to walk in and make sense of it. This is Delphi. The great oracle's home. The crossroads of gods and mortals, where the divine speaks in riddles and mortals try to make sense of their own questionable choices. You step inside, and immediately a hush settles over your thoughts. Your inner monologue dims. Even your insomnia stops scrolling for a second. In the center of the room, smoke curls upward from a bronze bowl. A priestess sits cross-legged nearby, eyes half closed, humming something that sounds like ancient Wi-Fi static. She looks, mildly amused. "Ah," she says, without opening her eyes, "you're here about the goose again." Because of course she knows. You sit cross-legged opposite her, suddenly feeling like you're about to take a pop quiz in cosmic absurdity. "Zeus," she murmurs, "never changes shape without changing fate." Historical fact, the oracle at Delphi, known as the Pythia, was the most powerful prophetic figure in the ancient Greek world. Leaders, generals, and wandering poets would all trek up the slopes of Mount Parnassus just to hear her cryptic one-liners, often delivered while sitting over a crack in the earth that leaked intoxicating gases. Truly the original, smoke machine wisdom, vibe. You lean forward. The oracle's eyes snap open, cloudy but sharp. He became a goose to chase a mortal. But what he truly chased, she trails off, waving her hand in slow, spiraling patterns, was relevance. You blink. Relevance? She nods sagely. It's hard being eternal in a world that forgets you. So the gods meddle. Shapeshift. Love. Rage. And yes, honk. The incense smoke thickens. You cough politely. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In a few extremely fringe sources, including one very enthusiastic 2nd century poet who may or may not have been cursed with interpretive dance visions, it's suggested that Zeus didn't choose a goose because of beauty or symbolism, but because it was the least expected form. The idea was that divinity should surprise, catch you off guard. What better way to reveal the divine than in something so absurd it had to mean something? Mortals keep asking the wrong questions, the oracle continues, now reaching for a tiny scroll. Not, why a goose, but why keep telling the story? She rolls the scroll open with a flourish. It's blank. But it's always a goose, she says. Even when it isn't. You don't understand. That's okay. Delphi doesn't require understanding. Just vibes. Historians still argue whether the oracle's visions were drug-induced, divinely inspired, or just really well-informed guesses. Some say she tapped into natural gases beneath the temple, others claim it was a trance state, a communal performance of sorts. But everyone agrees, what she said mattered. Even if it didn't make sense until 10 years later. You ask if she remembers what the oracle said when someone asked about Helen's fate. Her smile fades. We said, she will be the cause of longing and fire. A pause. We meant both literally and emotionally. You stand, gently brushing ash from your sleeves. The oracle doesn't stop you, just tilts her head and adds, beware the next bird. It's never just feathers. You take that wisdom with a grain of salt and a fistful of vague dread. Outside, the temple seems to lean slightly toward you, like it's listening. The path out of Delphi is crooked. That feels deliberate. As you walk, you hear whispers on the wind. Not voices, exactly. More like memories that never got properly filed. Was it a swan? Maybe a dream? Did the egg really glow? And then? Does it matter? You think about how many people ask the oracle to predict war, wealth, or love. And how many came away with something else entirely. You realize, slowly, that maybe the goose isn't the point. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was always about what we do with the story afterward. You pass a mural etched into rock, a spiraling scene of gods, birds, flames, ships. And right at the center, barely visible, is a woman holding an egg. She's neither smiling nor weeping. She's just, aware. You feel a little like that now. As you leave Delphi, the incense fades, the riddles settle, and the road narrows once more. You're walking not just through myth anymore, but through memory. Through story. Through 1,000 retellings of the same cosmic joke, whispered over time by poets, priests, and very confused scholars. And always, somewhere, lurking between the lines, there's a feather. The winding road from Delphi eventually flattens out, and you find yourself wandering into what could generously be called a divine family reunion, if your family reunion involved thunder, jealousy, and centuries of passive-aggressive side comments carved into temple walls. You're in a massive courtyard paved with cracked marble and old grudges. Columns rise like ancient fingers, and in the center is a long table overflowing with ambrosia, wine, and awkward silences. The Olympians have gathered. And things are tense. You ease into the corner like someone who accidentally walked into the wrong Airbnb and decided to stay for the snacks. Ares is sharpening a sword that doesn't need sharpening. Demeter is muttering to a bowl of very nervous-looking grapes. Hestia is just trying to keep the fire pit going without anyone throwing a curse in it. And at the head of the table, Zeus. Back in humanoid form. Lounging, smirking, pouring wine for himself like he's earned it. Which, arguably, he hasn't. He raises a goblet and says, to transformation. Hera stabs a fig with such force it makes Poseidon flinch. Again with the goose, she mutters. You don't appreciate performance art, Zeus replies, sipping dramatically. It's like watching Mount Olympus do dinner theater. But instead of clapping, everyone glares. Historical fact: family dynamics in the Greek pantheon were famously messy. Siblings married siblings. Children were born full-grown out of heads. Resentments lasted literal millennia. The gods were less a divine hierarchy and more a 24/7 group therapy session with lightning bolts. Ancient plays like those of Euripides and Aeschylus weren't shy about turning divine dysfunction into entertainment, or warnings. A chorus of nymphs brings in dessert. It's shaped like tiny eggs. Hera refuses hers. Aphrodite eats too. No one makes eye contact with Dionysus, who's wearing a goose feather boa for reasons no one wants to know. Then, out of nowhere, someone coughs and says, "Remember Io?" A silence falls like a dropped amphora. Zeus winces. Hera's eyes gleam. "Yes," she says, "let's." You may not know Io, but trust, she's Exhibit A in the divine awkward archive. A priestess of Hera whom Zeus fell in love with. To hide her from Hera's wrath, he turned Io into a cow. A literal cow. Hera found out, obviously, and sent a gadfly to torment her across the earth. Because nothing says cosmic vengeance like insect-based harassment. Or Europa, someone else adds. He turned into a bull that time. Picked her up, carried her across the sea. Classic move, mutters Hermes, mouth full of pomegranate. You watch this mythical group therapy unfold, realizing with every moment that Zeus's bird phase was not a one-time thing. It was part of a deeply ingrained pattern: animal form, seduction, confusion, legacy. Rinse. Repeat. Quirky tidbit: there's a rarely mentioned tale where Zeus, apparently running low on transformation ideas, considered turning into a lion, but decided it would send the wrong message. Too aggressive, he allegedly told a confused satyr. Not enough finesse. Historians still argue whether these animal transformation stories were meant as cautionary tales, coded political allegories, or just really dramatic metaphors for power and temptation. What's clear is that they stuck around, etched into pottery, whispered in temples, and scrawled on scrolls passed down through generations. You watch Athena stir her drink with the hilt of her sword. "He's lucky I'm not in charge of celestial HR, she mutters. "We'd have paperwork thicker than the Iliad." Can we all just agree, Hestia sighs, that the goose was unnecessary? "I liked the goose," Dionysus pipes up, tipsy and possibly wearing sandals made of cloud. "It had flair." The bickering continues. You sit quietly, observing how every eye roll, every side comment, every ancient grudge circles back to one central theme: the gods can't stop reliving their own stories. Because they are their stories. They don't age. They don't change. What they have is memory. And myth. And a deep, unshakable urge to remind everyone how important, how relevant, they still are. A sudden gust of wind rattles the olive trees. The table quiets. Everyone turns. It's Apollo. Sun god. Lyre enthusiast. Oracle whisperer. He steps into the light like a sponsored Instagram ad and clears his throat. "The mortals," he says, "are talking again. About the goose." Zeus perks up. Hera groans. Apollo smirks. They're saying it's a metaphor. Or a joke. Or performance art. Depends on the subreddit. Zeus lifts his goblet. Then they remember. That lands heavy. Because that's the point, isn't it? The divine gossip, the weird transformations, the cosmic bird cosplay, it's all part of staying in the story. Of being told, retold, and misunderstood in increasingly creative ways. Because when you're a god, irrelevance is the real death. The reunion winds down. Ambrosia is cleared. Feathers are swept. Zeus disappears in a puff of suspicious mist, probably headed off to shape-shift into something even less convenient. As the other gods drift away, grumbling, chuckling, threatening to leave a bad tablet review, you sit for a moment longer under the fading stars. You understand now, the goose wasn't random. It was memory insurance. It was myth maintenance. It was, somehow, working. Because here you are, still talking about it. By now, you're used to the drifting. The way one scene blurs into the next, like your subconscious is paging through a very dramatic ancient scrapbook. But even you don't expect to arrive where you do next, a sort of divine petting zoo. No, really. You're standing on a soft hillside beneath a sky stuck permanently in that golden hour photographers would sell their souls for. Marble signs line a long path, each with the name of a god or goddess and their preferred animal form. Statues, carvings, and very opinionated birds dot the landscape. Welcome to the mythological avian registry. A helpful cherub with a clipboard flutters by. Welcome. Looking for swans, geese, or rare eagle sightings today? You blink. He points helpfully. We have a whole aisle for Zeus's greatest hits. It's alphabetical by wingspan. You follow the cobblestone trail, passing enclosures and statues, each labeled with equal parts reverence and disbelief. Swan, Zeus, romantic endeavors, 3+ cases on record. Goose, Zeus, questionably effective disguise strategy. Eagle, Zeus, smiting pose preferred. Peacock, Hera, symbol of pride, drama, and really solid plumage. Owl, Athena, full-time bird of wisdom, part-time side expert. It's equal parts museum and mythic LinkedIn. You stop at a particularly smug-looking swan sculpture. Its wings are flared, and someone's added a tiny plaque beneath it that reads, "Symbolism pending." Historical fact, in Greek religion, animals weren't just symbolic, they were sacred messengers, embodiments of divine traits. Athena's owl, for example, wasn't just for vibes, it symbolized rational thought, perception, and a really effective glare. Zeus's eagle. Strength and sovereignty. But the goose? That one's still up for interpretation. Some ancient texts suggest it represented vigilance or eroticism. Others think the Greeks just had a weird sense of humor. And here's your quirky tidbit. One very obscure Hellenistic poet wrote a lost play titled The Feathered Seduction, which, by title alone, might have been ancient Greece's closest thing to mythological satire. Fragments suggest it involved at least 3 mistaken identities, one egg that kept rolling away, and a recurring joke about divine molting. You take a seat by a pool where sacred geese once bathed, yes, actual sacred geese. The Temple of Juno, the Roman Hera, in ancient Rome famously kept geese that were believed to have saved the city from invaders with their loud honking. Historians still argue whether the birds were actually divine guards or just really bad at whispering. So maybe Zeus was onto something after all. You continue along the path, passing a chalkboard with this week's seminar schedule. Symbolism or shenanigans, decoding divine bird choices. From egg to epic, the Leda situation revisited. Wings and whispers, the owl as an email in ancient Greece. You're tempted to sign up. Farther down, the path narrows. You pass a pen labeled Retired Forms. Inside, a tortoise shell, Hermes' short-lived attempt at humility, a shimmering fish, Poseidon's midlife crisis, possibly, and a suspiciously empty stall labeled, Cloud, Zeus, one-time use, very humid. It's around this moment you realize just how often gods in Greek myths used animals to dodge responsibility. Turn into a bull. You're not seducing Europa, you're exploring new forms of love. Show up as a swan. It's not deception, it's divine beauty on wings. Be an eagle. You're not abducting Ganymede, you're recruiting. Historians, of course, still argue whether this was narrative convenience, coded politics, or just the ancient version of saying, it's not me, it's the goose. You sit on a sun-warmed bench shaped like a giant feather. The air is quiet. A few birds fly overhead, real ones this time, not divine disguises. Or at least, you hope. And suddenly you wonder, what animal would you pick if you were a god trying to leave your mark? It's not an easy question. Swans are elegant, but high maintenance. Geese are memorable, but slightly terrifying. Eagles, overdone. Owls, too nocturnal. Dolphins, creepy smiles. Bears, too sleepy. Maybe something simple. A dog, maybe. Loyal. Direct. Less likely to show up in someone's romantic misadventure. You laugh quietly at the absurdity of it all. But that's the thing about mythology, it lets us put meaning into the bizarre. Into feathers and footprints. Into apples and arguments. Into gods acting like overdramatic cousins at a wedding. And somewhere, amidst the statues and scribbles, the ancient Greeks must have looked at all these birds, real or imagined, and said, yes. This is how we'll explain the world. Because birds fly. Birds change. Birds vanish, reappear, and make noise even when no one wants them to. Like stories. Like gods. Like Zeus, honking into legend. The feathered registry slowly fades behind you like a particularly surreal museum gift shop, and now you're moving through a quiet, open plain. The sky has gone soft, clouds stretching like sleepy arms, the sun dipping behind distant hills as if it, too, needs a nap from all this mythological melodrama. It's peaceful here. Still. But not empty. You spot a figure walking just ahead of you. Tall, cloaked, unhurried. You follow at a respectful distance until they stop at a tree that looks like it's seen every story ever told and is still unimpressed. The figure sits down, crosses their legs, and waves you over like you're late to the world's most cryptic book club. It's Prometheus. Yep, that Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and got a liver-pecking eagle subscription in return. Except today, he's off duty. No chains. No daily bird trauma. Just a guy who's tired of being everyone's moral footnote. You sit across from him. He studies you for a moment, then speaks, not grandly, not like some cosmic teacher, but like someone who's seen too much and finally got some peace and quiet. You're wondering, he says, if gods ever have bad days too. And honestly, yeah. You are. He leans back, hands behind his head. They don't talk about it, of course. But even Olympus has its off moments. Historical fact time, Greek myths weren't just about heroes and monsters. They were also about gods being painfully human. There are stories of Apollo being banned from Olympus and forced to herd sheep. Of Hephaestus getting drunk and throwing furniture. Of Demeter, grief-stricken, letting the world die until she got her daughter back. Even gods, it turns out, can't control everything. Especially their emotions. Prometheus throws a small pebble. It bounces once. Twice. Then rolls to a stop like even gravity's feeling mellow. Zeus, for example, he says, hates silence. He fills it with storms. With noise. With shape-shifting. You raise an eyebrow. So the goose. A distraction, Prometheus says. From his own thoughts. You think of Zeus's endless transformations, not just into animals, but into ideas, excuses, metaphors, messes. Maybe it's not about seduction or trickery or even drama. Maybe it's about control. When you're immortal and bored, a goose becomes a project. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some ancient inscriptions, Zeus is referred to not just as cloud-gatherer or father of gods, but as polymorphos, many-formed. Scholars still argue whether this was meant literally, hello, goose form, or philosophically, as a god constantly changing to fit the needs of the moment. Either way, the takeaway is the same: consistency was never Zeus's brand. You ask Prometheus what he thinks of it all. He chuckles. I think mortals are too forgiving. I give you fire and get a bird to the gut. He turns into a goose and somehow gets remembered as a king. Fair point. The wind picks up gently. Leaves rustle with lazy purpose. You notice now that the tree you're sitting under is carved with names. Ancient names. Mortal ones. Gods, heroes, footnotes. Someone scratched in Leda right next to Io, love, her own sanity. You lean back too. There's no rush. Not here. Prometheus is humming now. Not a tune you recognize, but it has the melancholy of someone who's watched humanity grow up and still wonders if it was a good idea. You know, he says, almost casually, gods get tired of being worshipped. But they're terrified of being forgotten. You let that settle. Because yeah. There it is. The goose, the bull, the golden rain, the cloud. Every absurd transformation, every scandalous myth, every egg laid and war launched, they're all part of one big, divine attention-seeking strategy. Not because the gods needed love, but because they needed to be remembered. Historians still argue whether myth was created to explain the world, to comfort, to control. But what if it was just legacy management? A way for ancient beings to stay relevant through drama? Prometheus stands slowly, dusts off his robes. Time's strange up here, he says. But eventually, every god needs a day off. Even Zeus. You watch him walk away toward the horizon, where the sky meets some distant myth not yet unrolled. And just before he vanishes into the gold-lit blur, he turns back. Oh, and tell them, next time he tries the goose thing, it's already been done. Then he's gone. You sit in silence for a while. And it's comforting, somehow, to know that even the gods, lightning-wielding, world-shaping, bird-becoming titans, sometimes need a break. That they have off days. Weird decisions. Regrets. They are, in some strange cosmic way, tired. Just like us. The plane fades behind you, and now you're descending a slow, spiraling slope carved into the side of some dream mountain. There's no handrail, of course not, and gravity feels more like a suggestion than a rule. The path is carved with stories, etched into stone so worn they look like they've been erased and re-remembered 1,000 times. And at the bottom, the air shifts. You're stepping into a wide marble chamber lit by torches that burn without fire. The light is soft, flickering. The atmosphere, though, is thick with tension and the scent of ink. You're in a debate hall. A very old one. And seated around a crescent-shaped table are a collection of people who are definitely not gods. No, these are scholars. Mythographers, historians, classicists, playwrights, at least 2 disgruntled monks, and one guy who's clearly just here for the free scrolls. They don't notice you at first. They're too busy bickering. Goose or swan, someone demands. Clearly swan, replies a toga-wearing scholar with an unnecessarily large feather quill. Absolutely goose, growls a bearded philosopher. You don't get that kind of chaos from a swan. That's a goose move. You pull up a chair quietly. It squeaks. 12 heads turn toward you. You've heard the myth, says a stern-looking woman in horn-rimmed glasses, that somehow exist in ancient Greece. What's your take? You pause. And then, wisely, say nothing. Historical fact, even in antiquity, myths weren't set in stone. Homer, Hesiod, Euripides, all told versions of the same stories, but with major plot differences. Leda's story. Sometimes it's a dream. Sometimes it's divine intervention. Sometimes it's straight-up metaphor. Later writers like Ovid tried to clean it up. Others leaned into the weird. Modern historians. Still no consensus. Some say Leda wasn't even the mother, someone mumbles, flipping through a crumbling manuscript. It was Nemesis, and the whole egg thing happened in a lake somewhere in Thessaly. And don't forget the Phantom Helen theory, another shouts. The one where Zeus sends a fake Helen to Troy while the real one is in Egypt. Fabricated to justify 10 years of war over a woman who may never have been there, someone mutters into their goblet. Quirky tidbit, the Phantom Helen version was championed by Euripides in his play Helen. In that version, the gods created a replica of Helen, made of mist or cloud, while the real Helen was whisked away to Egypt. The war. All for a copy. The poetic equivalent of fighting over a photoshopped profile picture. The scholars begin projecting scrolls onto the walls like divine PowerPoint slides. Diagrams, timelines, eggs rendered in varying degrees of realism. Someone's even sketched a Venn diagram labeled Zeus forms, sexy versus suspicious. They're not just arguing the facts, they're arguing meaning. Was the goose symbolic of purity? Or temptation? Or just Zeus's way of dodging a restraining order? You glance at the parchment in front of you. There's a chart with 4 columns. 1. Animal form. 2. Target mortal. 3. Resulting offspring. 4. Long-term mythological consequences. It's extensive. Color-coded. A birdwatcher's guide to divine scandal. And then someone at the end of the table bangs a staff. The room hushes. A new voice speaks, low, thoughtful, with the kind of authority that smells faintly of mothballs and certainty. Perhaps the story endures, he says, not because it's true, but because it's too strange not to tell again. The others nod, reluctantly. Historians still argue, he continues, because that's the job. But myths? Myths argue with themselves. You realize, with a kind of sleepy clarity, that these myths were never meant to be resolved. They were designed to ripple outward, changing with the telling, evolving with each generation's needs. One era sees divine romance. Another sees manipulation. Another sees metaphors wrapped in feathers and confusion. Someone clears their throat. So, do we mark it swan or goose? There's a long pause. And then the horn-rimmed woman says, just put bird-shaped ambiguity. Everyone agrees. The light dims as the scholars begin packing up their scrolls, mumbling about publishing deadlines and missing footnotes. The walls shimmer with half-finished thoughts. What if Helen never existed, floats by. What if the egg was political commentary, follows behind. You leave them to it. Outside, the world feels quieter. Like it's still digesting what happened in that room. And you're starting to understand, it was never about answers. It was about asking the kind of questions that echo. Who was she? Why the bird? What if myth is just how we process the impossible parts of being human? And why does that goose keep showing up when you close your eyes? The path ahead opens into a garden. Not wild and unruly, like some enchanted forest out of a fairy tale, but not manicured either. This garden feels intentional, balanced. Like someone with a serious eye for metaphor and an unlimited olive budget designed it for quiet walks and very loud thoughts. You follow the winding trail, feet crunching gently over crushed seashells. Every plant here seems chosen for a reason. A rose bush tangled with thorny vines sits across from a laurel tree. A patch of poppies grows next to a bed of onions. Beauty and tears. Glory and grief. Classic Greek gardening. At the center of it all is a pond, still and circular, like a forgotten mirror. Sitting on a bench beside it, elegant posture, eyes half-lidded like she's balancing a secret on the tip of her tongue, is Helen. That Helen. Older now than when you last saw her in Troy. Not physically, myths don't age that way, but emotionally. She carries herself like someone who's seen herself told and retold by too many voices to know which one was hers in the first place. You sit beside her without asking. She doesn't look at you. Just says, "They're still debating, aren't they?" You nod. She smiles. Good. Historical fact, Helen of Troy, or Helen of Sparta depending on when you catch her, was considered the most beautiful woman in the world, divinely so. Her legacy was written into plays, poems, statues, and diplomatic disasters. And yet, her story changed constantly depending on who told it. In Homer's Iliad, she seems regretful, self-aware, even guilty. In Euripides' Helen, she never even went to Troy. In later Roman stories, she becomes less a person and more an excuse. I've been a prize, a pawn, a ghost, a goddess, she says softly. All from one egg. Or maybe two. Or maybe none. Her voice is calm, but there's iron beneath it. I've been loved, worshipped, blamed, and sometimes, completely invented. She turns to you. Her gaze is clear. And what am I to you? You pause, then shrug. A mystery. She chuckles. Good answer. Safe, too. She plucks a petal from a nearby flower and drops it into the pond. The water accepts it without a ripple. You know the funny part, she says. Everyone remembers the face that launched 1,000 ships. No one remembers the years after. You tilt your head. What happened? Helen's lips curl slightly. Depends who you ask. Some say I went back to Sparta with Menelaus, like nothing happened. Others say I was exiled. One version claims I ascended to Olympus. Another says I was murdered by a jealous relative. A beat. And one, my favorite, says I left everything behind and vanished into Egypt, where I became a goddess of the moon and never spoke Greek again. Quirky tidbit, in a few rare variations, Helen is associated with the Egyptian goddess Isis. Some scholars theorize that Greek travelers, encountering temples and stories in Egypt, blended local myths with their own. It's speculative, sure, but also very human. We tell stories with the tools we have, and sometimes, we mix up the labels. Helen's reflection wavers in the water. Maybe I was never real, she says. Maybe I was just the idea of beauty. A reason to fight. A dream men could chase and blame when it burned. She leans back on the bench, folding her hands in her lap like royalty in exile. You ask her about her siblings, Castor, Pollux, Clytemnestra. A softness crosses her face. We were a family, once. Before the gods turned us into statues and constellations. Before stories cracked us open and decided who we were. Historians still argue whether Helen was a goddess, a demigod, a mortal, or an invention of poetic necessity. Some even speculate she was a composite, multiple women, multiple stories, all folded into one unforgettable symbol. And maybe that's what makes her enduring, not her face, but her adaptability. She glances at you again, curious now. And what about the goose? You laugh. Still undecided. Good, she says again. Because deep down, you realize, the absurdity is part of the endurance. The goose makes it impossible to ignore. It anchors the myth in something so bizarre, so oddly specific, that you have to remember it. The wind rustles the olive branches above. A few leaves spiral down into the pond, joining the petal. You ask Helen what she believes, about her own story. She considers. Then shrugs, almost playfully. I believe I was real to the people who needed me. A daughter. A sister. A queen. A reason. A ghost. A pause. And once, for a very dramatic afternoon, a prize in a god's wager. You sit together in silence for a while. The pond reflects the sky, and you wonder what kind of face it sees looking back. Eventually, she stands, dusts off her gown, and stretches like someone getting ready to return to a story she's outgrown. Don't let them make me smaller, she says. Not after all this time. Then she walks away, slowly, steadily, back into the garden's shifting paths. You watch her go, unsure whether you'll see her again. But something tells you she'll show up, again and again. In different forms. Different names. Still glowing with impossible beauty and impossible burden. Because myths, like people, never disappear. They just wait to be told again. You're alone in the garden now, except you're not really alone. Because the myths. They linger. They watch. They echo through fig leaves and ripple across the still water like an old joke trying to remember its punchline. And once again, you feel the gentle pull, like a hand behind your back guiding you forward through yet another unraveling layer of legend. This time, you're back where you started. The moon is full, the sky slightly bruised with starlight, and there's that same quiet lake. And on the surface of the water, gliding in elegant loops, feathers shining with celestial smugness, is a goose. The goose. You sigh. You were doing so well. But before you can mentally prepare for another round of shape-shifting nonsense, someone clears their throat behind you. A scholar again? A god? Nope. It's a man in a hoodie, holding a tablet, glasses slipping down his nose, muttering something about source texts and the politics of allegory. You've somehow wandered into a very modern debate, and things are about to get spicy. He gestures toward the lake and says, you know, some people think the whole goose thing was just ancient satire. You blink. Satire? He nods. Yep. A divine inside joke. Like, what's the most ridiculous form the king of the gods could choose? A goose. It's so dumb, it has to mean something. Or maybe it's just dumb. He sits beside you, tapping notes into his tablet like he's solving a puzzle made of feathers and plot holes. Historical fact, by the late classical period, even the Greeks were confused by some of their own myths. Philosophers like Plato rolled their eyes at the gods' bad behavior, while playwrights turned divine scandals into comedy. Aristophanes, for instance, wasn't afraid to mock gods, politics, or both at the same time, sometimes using animals as stand-ins. The divine goose? It might have been part of that same wink-wink, nudge-nudge tradition. Still, the man says, it's a resilient story, isn't it? You nod. Because at this point, how could you not? And here's your quirky tidbit, there's a fringe theory out there, floated by a handful of bold, or possibly slightly drunk, classicists, that the Zeus goose myth was an early form of mythological trolling. A response to rival poets. A way to say, look, I can get people to believe anything, even that the king of the gods turned into a honking farm bird to hook up with a Spartan queen. You want to scoff. But you also remember what you've seen. You remember the gods fighting over apples and identity. You remember eggs hatching twins who became stars. You remember Helen, tired and beautiful and complicated. You remember Prometheus on his day off. And now, you remember this goose. Just floating. Minding its divine business. You know, the scholar muses, tapping the screen again, some say the goose represents how myth resists logic. That the more we try to explain it, the more it honks and flies away. You both stare at the water. The goose stares back. And somehow, it makes sense. Because myths aren't puzzles to solve. They're mirrors held up to our weirdest questions. They're dreams that pretend to be history. They're the stuff we whisper when the real world doesn't quite add up, and sometimes that whisper sounds like a honk. Historians still argue whether myths like this should be taken seriously, or if they're too absurd to merit formal analysis. But that's the beauty of myth, it doesn't ask for permission to exist. It just shows up. In plays, in books, in tattoos, in memes. It morphs, adapts, survives. And a goose-shaped Zeus? That's just myth at its most unapologetic. The scholar stands, brushing off his jeans. Well, I've got a panel to speak on, avian semiotics in divine seduction myths. Total clickbait title, but the undergrads love it. He waves and walks off into the mist, which is just unfairly dramatic for someone holding a tablet. You're alone again. Except for the goose. It swims a slow circle, then glides toward the shore. As it steps onto the grass, the air shifts, and for just a moment, the feathers shimmer. The eyes flash gold. The shape stretches. And you swear, just for a second, you see him. Zeus. Smiling like he knows exactly how ridiculous this all is. And then, poof, the goose waddles off into the reeds. Not majestic. But definitely memorable. You sit there a little longer, because at this point, leaving too soon feels disrespectful. The moon hangs low. The water settles. And somewhere in the distance, you think you hear the faint, cosmic honk of a god who refuses to be forgotten. And so, here you are, back at the beginning, yet farther than you've ever been. The lake is still. The air is cool and laced with the subtle scent of olives, dusk, and maybe just a whisper of goose. You're not really surprised anymore. You've been to Olympus and Delphi. Sat with gods and mortals. You've seen Helen under moonlight and Prometheus on break. You've watched myths twist around themselves like smoke, and now you're back beneath a sleepy sky, the same moon watching over you like it's in on the joke. Across the pond, something moves. There's a shimmer in the water, and you see it again, feathers white as lightning, eyes far too knowing for a bird. The goose. Still here. Still watching. Still existing. You sigh. But it's a fond sigh now. Because what once seemed absurd now feels, well, still absurd, but with purpose. The goose, this honking emblem of divine nonsense, isn't a glitch in the myth. It's the feature. The signature. The one thing Zeus did that nobody can forget, not because it's grand, but because it's weird. Historical fact, ancient mythographers often included the oddest details deliberately. Because people remember odd. They remember the off-key note in a perfect song. The thunder god who turns into poultry. The queen who lays eggs. These details are sticky, slippery little puzzles that get passed down not because they explain the world, but because they complicate it. And that's how stories survive. The goose stretches its neck, wings lifting slightly in a breeze that feels orchestrated. You almost expect it to speak. But of course, it doesn't. It just turns. And begins to walk away. You don't follow. You've learned better than that. When a god shaped like a farm bird decides it's time to go, you don't chase it. You just let it go. With grace. And, maybe a slow clap. Quirky tidbit. One ancient Athenian drinking song mentions a feathered god whose footsteps left dreams in the grass. It was never confirmed who the song referred to. But you'd bet a full amphora of Dionysus's second-best wine that it was Zeus. Probably trying to crash a festival disguised as a duck. And yet, even after everything, you realize this story isn't about Zeus. Not really. It never was. It's about Leda. It's about Helen. It's about the twin stars flickering above you, Castor and Pollux, trading places between Olympus and the underworld in eternal siblinghood. It's about mortals trying to navigate chaos, gods trying to stay relevant, and stories trying to outlive the people who told them. You lie down on the grass, arms behind your head, staring at the stars. Historians still argue, poets still rewrite, and somewhere in the reeds, something honks. But here, in this quiet pocket of mythic exhaustion, it's not about debate. Or origin. Or even legacy. It's about myth doing what myth does best, sneaking into your brain and making itself comfortable. So the next time someone says, you know that story where Zeus turns into a goose. You'll smile. Because yeah. You know. You were there. And just as your eyelids begin to droop, and the weight of feathers and fables begins to ease from your shoulders, the wind carries one last, soft, almost smug honk across the water. Perfectly timed. Perfectly unnecessary. Perfectly unforgettable. Now, let everything slow down. Let the stories settle like dust in a sunbeam. The goose is gone. The gods are quiet. The debates have faded into the hush of old scrolls and the gentle rustle of myth's final pages turning themselves. The moon is higher now. Softer. The kind of moon that doesn't illuminate so much as it soothes. The pond is still, save for a faint ripple here and there, nothing urgent, just memory stretching its legs before sleep. The night is thick and warm, wrapping around your body like a heavy cotton blanket pulled straight from the dryer. Every sound feels distant. Muted. As if the world, too, has dimmed its brightness to let you rest. Let the images blur. Let Helen's eyes close. Let Prometheus finally lay down without a bird in sight. Let Mount Olympus drift back into cloud. The myths will still be there tomorrow. Or the next night. Or the next time you find yourself wondering how stories so strange could ever survive this long. But for now, it's just you. Breathing slowly. Letting go. Letting your thoughts feather out like a dream just beyond reach. No gods. No eggs. No drama. Just stillness. And maybe, if you listen closely, a faint, distant honk. Far away. Almost like it's laughing.